we could go into the moral premise.
Well, I can try.
Okay.
You know, I'm talking a lot here about showing and not telling, and we're doing a lot of telling right now. Let
Yeah.
me I wrote something out. Let me try to explain this. I got 2 paragraphs to see if this makes sense, and then you can
Okay.
follow it up with questions.
I'll
Because when I
swim in
do
the
this
background in my tiara or my
yeah,
wig.
right. There you go. Um, when I explain this in my workshops, obviously I have and this is why I have slides and all kinds of visuals because it helps to see the structure and stuff. So
Mhm.
the moral premise, this is as simply as I can make it. The moral premise is a single sentence that describes the conflict of values that every character in every scene of a story or movie struggles with. So you might have a conflict of values between greed and generosity. There's a number of ways that you can show how people are greedy. They might be greedy about money. No, I
Right,
won't give you the loan. They might
right.
be greedy about time. No, I don't have time for you.
Yeah,
They might be greedy about food and says, no, that's my food. That's my sandwich. Yeah, I know
yeah.
I've had one already, but so there's a number of ways. So every character, so let's say you have 5 characters in a movie, they all have to struggle with greed in a different way. So the sentence that comprises the moral premise has to correspond universally to common sense. We have common sense that if we're greedy, we're going to lose friends. But if we're generous, we're going to make friends. So that's the natural law. It's a cause and effect. If we're greedy, there's a cause. That's the cause. And the effect is that we're going to be lonely. If we're generous, that's the cause. And the effect is that we're going to make friends. So the moral premise is a two-part complex sentence that relates a motivational vice, greed or generosity, and its outward natural consequences, either loneliness or friendship. And so those two, the vice and the virtue of the moral premise have to be polar opposites. They've got to be, and the consequences have to be opposite.
Hmm.
So, for instance, greed, the vice, leads to loneliness, but generosity leads to friendship. That's a moral premise statement. Greed leads to loneliness, but generosity leads to friendship. So the inner value always has to be paired with an outward consequence that follows natural law. And although greed leads to loneliness, but generosity leads to friendship is a simple sentence, it is a complex sentence. There's 2 parts of that sentence with a
Right.
semicolon between them. And the artistic or the art of taking that moral premise is applying it to the subplots and the path of every one of your characters.
Yeah,
And when
yeah.
you can do that and plot it out, then you're going to have a movie that's going to work at least. I mean, maybe a lot of reasons why the movie may not connect with people, but it'll definitely connect on a story level.
Yes.
So the dynamic of how these play in character developments is a cycle with 4 stages. And I've mentioned this before. So the character possesses a high held value, greed. That value motivates a character to decide, I'm going to take that person's sandwich. What action to take? They actually take the sandwich. And then there's an outward consequence. There's a fist fight in the lunchroom over the sandwich. So there's the value, greed, decision, I'm going to take a sandwich, the action, taking the sandwich and eating it, and then the natural law consequence over which they have no decision because natural law takes over. There's a fist fight and they're both expelled from school. So that's the best way. And that cycle of
Yeah.
value, decision, action, and consequence repeats itself over and over throughout the movie for each of your characters as it repeats itself for us in our natural life. So that's the
Yeah.
best way I got to explain the moral premise. Got a
That I
question?
well, it took me a while to get a handle on it, but I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But and so I don't know
Yeah,
if
but
this is
you're
too.
really good at spreading butter.
I like that. Boy, man. So the each character, I think this is one of the cool things is like you're saying, like the idea of greed, and each character is dealing with a greed in a different way, like the time or the money or the food or whatever. Like that kind of keeps it interesting in a sense. So then what about like the characters? And I'm sure you're the one that told me about this, but a character goes from A to B, and the A to B can't be too far. Like it has to
Yeah,
be a realistic amount.
yeah, right.
Is so if we had the line and one character's A and B is here, can they be in different places? Or they kind of need to be like in similar walks of life, so to speak. You know
Well,
what I mean?
the characters have to be related somehow. I mean, actually, I haven't plotted this out, but there's a wonderful movie um, Brad Pitt stars in. He's in Saudi Arabia or some desert place, and his wife is shot accidentally on a bus. And what's that called? But there's
Oh, yeah, I don't
five.
know.
There's five characters. There's five stories, and they're all
Okay.
merged together. And they're in five different parts of the world. One of the stories is in Japan, in Tokyo. Another
Huh.
story is in Saudi Arabia. Another one's in England.
Okay.
Probably one's in America. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and they're all dealing with similar narcissistic tendencies and a refusal to accept natural law. And they're all trying to make their lives work according to their own stubborn wills. And bad things happen to all of them. And
Interesting.
the genius of the screenplay, and I can't remember the name right now, is that they all come together in Act Three.
Huh.
It's like the bridge over San Luis Rey, the famous story about the collapsed bridge down in the Andes.
Okay.
The story starts with all these different characters. I think there are 10 characters in the short novel, and they're
Yeah.
in different parts of the world, and they all come on this holiday to this Andes resort, and they all happen to cross this rope bridge at the same time as part of a tour. The bridge collapses and they all die. Well, I'm yeah, it's a happy movie, right? But in this movie, there's redemption. There's redemption for Brad Pitt and everybody else, and Brad
Huh.
Pitt's the lead character. But one of the stories is the kids they have the rifle, and they say, "Oh, what can we do with this?" And so they go up within a rock and they shoot at a bus. Well, they have no idea what the bus is or who's on it, but they end up killing Brad Pitt's wife. You know, she doesn't
Yeah.
die right away, but
Yeah.
that's part of the story.
Yeah.
So you can have people in divergent ways, but they have to be connected in some way, physically
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah. 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 There's no, that's good. And maybe I don't know if this is a good example, but did you ever watch the Les Mis, the movie Les Mis?
Yeah, I've
The
seen it,
recent one?
and I'm familiar with the story. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I was
you
just
have
thinking I was thinking about the what's his name? Not Javert, the other guy, 24601, that dude. He like when he goes and stays at the Monsignor, the bishop's house, and the Monsignor is like really, or the bishop's really kind to him.
yeah.
And that's like a big moment for that character. Um
Is that the
so there
bishop's house where the candlesticks have been stolen?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the
yeah,
bishop tells him, "No, I gave them to him."
yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, the bishop isn't really in the movie that long,
No.
but he's really important.
Yeah.
And um, but I don't know. I just that's what came
Well,
to mind. So
Dickens' Tale of Two Stories is another great example.
okay,
'Cause you
good.
have London versus Paris during the French Revolution. And you have these characters in London, you have characters in Paris, and then you have the characters that are going back and forth,
Yeah,
and they're all dealing with the same thing. And so there's two diverse areas. They're two different, totally different cities at that point in history, and yet there's this commonality between them, and how the one helps redeem the other.
Yeah.
or elements of it. So you have characters that are metaphors for the cities. That's
Yeah.
another thing. We need to understand that characters in movies and actions in movies are metaphors of the moral values about which
Mm,
the movie is really about.
mm,
There,
mhm.
so you think of um, the picture on the screen is simply a metaphor of the value that you're debating, that the dilemma is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you
Boy.
have characters in these stories, and you have characters that represent the British and characters or Londonites, and other characters that represent the revolutionaries in Paris, and other
Yeah.
characters that represent the priest caught in the middle, and but so they are representative of larger populations, and those larger populations, that's what helps them connect with the story. They say, I'm not a person living in London, but I understand what it would be like to be that person. And so
Yeah.
I'm, I can identify with the dilemma that that person is facing.
Yeah.
Do they give their life? What motivates them to give their life for this other person? You know,
Yes. Yes. That it kinda makes me think of going back to the Pope in the pool. Like, whoever the Pope in whatever pool it is, it could represent, like, what you're saying right now,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
it's
it has to, it
it
has
has
to.
to.
And
Yeah.
that's why when we talk about the conflict of values, like in the moral premise, greed versus generosity, um,
Yeah.
those values that we set up in our story have to be universally accepted by the audience, our intended audience.
Yeah.
So um, there was a guy from Florida. You're down in Florida. You're not him, but he wanted me. I'll try to keep this general. Well, it deals with abortion.
Okay.
He wrote a story that he thought should be made into a movie. And the story was about aborted babies who come back to earth as angels and convict the parents and the doctors who aborted them of their sin.
Hmm.
And so the moral premise of the movie essentially was abortion is wrong. If you abort people, judgment awaits. If you don't, uh,
Happily ever after.
judge less or something.
Yeah.
And he thought he wanted me to make this movie, and he didn't have any funding. He thought I could fund it. But aside from the funding aspect, I said, I forget his name right now, but I says, John, no one's going to watch this movie. And he kept saying, and the reason I said no one's going to watch the movie is that he was trying to, well, how do I say? His response to, I said, no one's going to watch the movie, John. And he said to me, oh, but if they watch it, they'll be converted of heart and they'll change.
Ah,
And the problem here is that he was assuming that the values and the diegesis of his story were similar to the natural law of the abortionists.
yeah,
Well, the
yeah.
abortionists didn't have the same natural law perspective that John had.
Right, right.
So the movie
Yeah.
would not connect with the abortionists.
Yeah.
The abortionists would never go to watch the movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And John kept saying, but if they watch the movie, they'll be converted. I says, they're not going to watch the movie. Why am I making it? It's clear, you know.
Yeah.
So when you go to a movie, this is another little pet peeve of mine with script reviewers in Hollywood. They say, "No, send the script in. Don't tell me anything about it. I'll see the title, and the movie will stand on its own, and I'll be able to judge it just by the script alone." And my response is, "No, that's not how people watch movies." When you go to a movie, you see the title, you see a poster, you watch a trailer, you listen to friends, you read reviews, and then you go see the movie.
Right, right.
You know a lot about that movie and whether or not you're going to agree with its physical premise and possibly its moral premise before
Right,
you go.
right.
So that's why I've been trying to convince people, but I've been unsuccessful, that the first page of a screenplay sent in for review should have, and you've probably seen this from me, story fundamentals. There should be like 8 story fundamentals that tell me what this movie is about at a
Yeah, yeah,
physical level and on a moral level, the title and the setting and the era and all that.
yeah.
So that the reviewer, I mean, maybe
Right,
they hate
right.
thrillers, Well, this is a thriller. Don't read it. Give it to someone who likes thrillers because, you know, if you don't like thrillers, you're not going to like my script.
So one writer, and you've got everyone's dealing with their part of the moral premise, their vice, so to speak, but it's coming from the same writer.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I've go ahead. I want to hear what you any
Well,
thoughts.
the problem you're alluding to is how does one writer get inside the head of desperately diverse characters
Right,
and
right.
write them so that they're really inside that other character's head.
Yeah.
Um, the preliminary story I like to tell about this is that for 2 years, I took some Catholic. Well, there was I think 8 Catholic teenagers and one Hindu teenager. And listen to this: the Hindu, not because she was Hindu, but just she just happened to be Hindu.
Happen to be.
The
Okay.
Hindu is the only one that ended up in Hollywood. They all wanted to go make movies. Only the Hindu ended up in Hollywood, and that had nothing to do with her being Hindu. It's just kind of an ironic thing that
Ironic. Right,
there was these
right.
great Catholic, and they all went through my course. They all went, all to my stuff. Um, the I told the I, but the Hindu was similar to the Catholics, and because she came from a very high moral home, well, good home, and I said to the Catholic kids, these are all homeschooled Catholic kids, all very smart. I had
Yeah.
had them in a couple classes in a homeschool enhancement program thing a couple years before, and then they all decided they wanted to learn about screenwriting and movies and stuff, and so for 2 years they came to my house for 3 hours one time a month. So we had like 24 sessions. And then, as it turned out, at the end of those 2 years, um, I was working with Will Smith on some projects, and I got Will to invite us all down to uh, a set where they were shooting in Pennsylvania. And
Oh, cool.
I took my whole class to meet Will Smith, and we spent a whole day with Will on the set. It was
Wow.
that was
I'm
really a
sure they
trip,
love that.
literally a trip. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my problem to these kids was I says, you've got a problem. You have got to write about evil and evil characters, and you don't know what evil is. You've been
Mm,
protected. You've been
mm,
in a protected environment. Yeah, you're not protected from the news. You're told about it, but you've never
sure.
experienced it. None of
Right.
you are homeless. None of you are in poverty. None
Yeah.
of you have parents who are addicted or murderers or in prison. That's
Right.
not like you have no idea. So I said, you've got to do something to learn that because you've got to write about evil. That's, good movies are about good versus evil.
Right. Right.
So, so my suggestion to them is first off, you've got to read plenty of other award winning screenplays, not just any screenplays, but you can download these on the web or buy them, and popular novels, and see how different characters act and talk. Because every character, depending on their upbringing, their childhood wounds, their education, are going to talk differently.
Right.
Almost every famous novel, especially in the early 1900s, have turns of phrases and characters that are totally unique. A great example of this that you know people should read time and time again is Huckleberry Finn.
Mm,
All the characters in Huckleberry Finn talk and act differently. So you
mm.
can learn a lot about that. I forget the name of the book, but it was Samuel Clement's book. Boy, it's on the tip of my tongue about Black characters uh, before the Civil War, and he had and how they talk. Well, it was about their lives, and to
Yeah.
help understand and read the novel, or it was a short novel, was a glossary of terms and a pronunciation guide because you could not read or understand the book without it.
Ah,
And
yeah.
so when I wrote my novel, The Wizard Cliff Haunting, I copied that, well, I adapted what Mark Twain did in that book. And so my slave characters in Wizard Cliff Haunting tend to talk like Mark Twain taught me how they should talk, from that
Yeah.
period.
Really pretty cool. So
Another thing you can do to learn how to write different characters is to take a notebook. And I think, yeah, this is the notebook that I carried around for a long time. Haven't done it lately, but I don't know if you can see that. What does that say? It says,
imperfect characters research.
yeah. So what I did was that I would take this book with me and I would, and I would, there'd be a party or a family gathering, or you take it to church or to any
Yeah.
place where there are people, a baseball
Yeah.
game, right?
Yeah.
And you watch a person and you start writing down their characteristics. What do
Yeah.
they do? How do they talk?
Yeah.
And you phonetically write out the words, because they may talk with a lisp.
Yeah.
I have a granddaughter that she's 13 now, and she still talks with a lisp like a little child. And I keep telling her mother, my daughter, says, don't change it. Do not take her to therapy. She will be able to earn $1 million doing voiceovers.
Right.
And and I was half serious because here
Yeah.
in Detroit, I've hired a lot of actors in my corporate days and
Yeah.
some of my fiction days too. But there was an old woman here in Detroit. I forget her name now, who was a voice actor, and she was the little girl's voice you heard on all the commercials.
Oh, wow.
And I met
Wow.
her, and it was just amazing. She
Wow.
could turn it on. She didn't talk like that all the time. She could turn it on and
Wow.
so take a notebook like this and take notes. Just take
Yeah.
notes because the people you want to write about are the people around you. They're all around you, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they all have peculiarities, you know.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
I know a woman who uh, does not go out uh, to work in her garden without having her hair done and putting on the nicest clothes possible. It's the strangest thing. And she acts very normal, but you
Right.
think,
Right.
what are you doing?
Right.
Your white
Right.
pants kneeling in the dirt. Well,
Right.
I always dress up.
That's pretty
My
interesting, though.
my father, of course, my dad was born in 1894, so he was old enough to be my grandfather.
Yeah.
And he got married twice, and his first wife died of cancer. Righteous woman. The description of her dying in the bed at home was like watching an angel pass into eternity. But he then married my mother later on, and she was 20 years his junior. And
Okay.
but so he came through the Depression. He came through World War One.
Yeah.
He was in the National Guard during World War One and all this sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And Dad always wore a tie, a white shirt and a tie when he mowed the grass.
Wow.
And it was not a power motor; it was a push motor.
Wow.
I still
Wow.
remember that. So you know, and
Wow.
there's people that grew up through the Depression that they couldn't understand why I would take a risk and quit my job at Ford Motor Company and make films because it was so you know
Yeah.
insecure.
Yeah.
And he had a secure job that he worked at Ford Motor Company for 60 years and had a great pension and all that.
Yeah.
He could not understand why I would do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Right.
those are characteristics
That's right.
and those are
That's
values. So write them down.
yeah. Kind of on that too. My dad and my mother, they wrote a book about my uncle, my dad's brother. So Uncle Mike, and he had Down syndrome.
Oh,
So
cool. Yes.
and so there was kind of like you're saying, like, and the name of the book was I'm half big dreams. Like it was, and then he had his index of like the words, the Uncle Mikeisms of,
Right.
so to
Yeah.
speak.
That'd be a good.
So
I'd love to read that, by the way. That'd be good.
I'll send
I
you
have
one.
I have a brother-in-law who is cerebral palsy, and
Ah,
they didn't think Tommy would live um, more than a year or two when he was born. And they
yeah,
they told my in-laws, put him into a institution at birth. And
exactly.
and my
Exactly.
and my wife, his sister, Tommy's sister, and her sister. said, no, no, absolutely bring him. And they harassed their parents and the doctors until Tommy came home to live after 6 months or something like that.
Wow.
And Tommy is today, I think he's something like 65 years old and
Wow.
still collecting the trash at the retirement center. And
Wow.
he's the best friends of everybody in the retirement center. He walks and talks, and he's savant about dates and times. He can tell
Wow.
you what day of the week a certain date is. That sort of craziness.
Yeah.
So, and I've thought for a long time um, that Tommy would. Well, I've encouraged my wife and her sister. I said, "You've got to write a book about Tommy. You know,
Yeah.
you got to write a book about Tommy."
Absolutely. I'll send it to you. He could,
Yeah,
Uncle Mike, he was at Villanova University until, and then he retired from there. Like he worked in the kitchen, you
oh,
know?
please, yeah, please send me
Yeah.
the book. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love stuff like. See, that's a hook. That's irony. That's
Yeah.
where you find something that is absolutely impossible. You have someone buried, uh, born with cerebral palsy. They can't walk. They can hardly breathe on their own. And how does that person become a thriving? And Tommy worked in workshops and earned a living for a while, not enough to live on his own, but totally defied the medical community. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a hook.
Yeah.
Makes a good story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's
And
true.
and there are um, Down syndrome's actors, by the way, that could play
Uncle
your
Mike. Right. Yeah,
they
you're
play
right.
Uncle Mike in a movie if you made that in a movie.
So if you'd like to get ahead of this conversation, you can head over to Stan's website. You go to stanwilliams.com and you'll see there he actually has his storycraft training online for free. He just started releasing it. So this is kind of a huge deal. I hope you take advantage of it. I've learned so much from Stan, and we're going to go and explore more points on our next podcast. We'll tackle a few more. Mark your calendars. It's coming up. We're going to have the Lumen Summit, October 2nd through the 4th. It's going to be in Florida, in Jacksonville. And if you are a Catholic filmmaker, if you're a professional Catholic filmmaker, you're invited. So you can go to lumen.tv to learn a little bit more. Next time I see you, hope to see Christ in you.